So welcome everybody to the Deeptime Network. We're a network that is looking at everything inside of a grand narrative of the universe and finding that foundational for our sense of who we are and purpose and what we're doing in our lives. And we draw people from lots of different lineages, like a new story lineage inspired by Teilhard de Chardin and Thomas Berry and Brian Swimme, Montessori lineage, and a Gaia systems theory lineage, and a big history lineage, and lots of other people too. These are just some main ones to name. So tonight we have the real amazing pleasure of being with Jeanne Clark, who is celebrating the publication of her book by Orbis Press. But before I just introduce her, a few things about Zoom. Please keep yourselves muted at all times. We need to do that because we get too much feedback if you don't keep yourself muted. And if you accidentally unmute yourself, Lisa Verney is here and she's going to be on the lookout for that. And so she might just go ahead and mute you. You have a choice of viewing, gallery view or speaker view. Just drag your cursor up to the top right and select your option under view, either speaker view or gallery view. And later when we do the Q&A, I'll tell you a little bit about how to ask questions. Okay, so Sister Jeanne Clark is a sister of St. Dominic from Amityville, New York. She's an educator who has been instrumental in the creation of Homecoming Farm, a community-supported agricultural project, or CSA, which helps humans heal through the nurturance of soil and seed and producing vegetables without the use of chemicals. She has also offered programs for children and adults in understanding themselves as part of Earth and as intricately connected to the land they call home. Jeanne has been a teacher for over 50 years, has been a campus minister, a pastoral associate in parishes, and a longtime activist in both anti-nuclear, anti-war, and environmental causes. Jeanne, a storyteller and poet, attributes her coming home to the land to the Salvadoran people whom she accompanied to El Salvador during the war there in the 1980s. In 2005, Jeanne was awarded the Peacemaker of the Year award by Pax Christi, Long Island. And we're going to start with a poem that actually Jeanne wrote when she was inspired by a quote by Teilhard de Chardin. Jeanne, why don't you start us off with that?
This is what Teilhard said. You have become, for my mind and heart, much more than a God who was and who is. You have become God who shall be. I read this quote while sitting alongside my friend, the Great South Bay, on Long Island here, and this poem emerged. I titled it, Thank You, Teilhard. To find God in matter, in something we can touch and hold, something we can taste and feel and become part of, God, close, always present, yet moving, expanding, creating space. We are called by the future to create the way, the path, beyond the obstacles, trusting the unknown, having faith that the unimaginable will emerge from a place unseen, unexpected. love emerging against all odds. Trust, have faith in the created, in matter that is sacred, and tells us that we are whole and holy. To know the sacred in a seed, in God becoming, born before our very eyes, believing in a God who was and is becoming.
Thank you, Jeanne. That's so powerful. It just completely reorients us to the earth, to the here, the now, and the future. Thank you so much for that poem. So in your book, and I have to hold it up for everybody if you haven't seen it, here it is. Oops. All the way in, A Story of Activism, Incarceration, and Organic Farming. Reverence for matter runs throughout your book. And it's also a core Dominican teaching. You were explaining to me so much about that the other day. I found it so profound, Jeanne. And your story braids together different strands: activism, farming, spirituality, and education. And you pull it all together inside of a deep time cosmological context. I was thinking we could first explore the activism in your life and being incarcerated. Can you tell us the story about your involvement with the Trident Submarine? And first, give us an understanding of the magnitude of the Trident. Why was it so important, your work there? And then tell us about your involvement.
Mm-hmm. Yes, well, I don't know how many of you have heard of the Trident Submarine, but it is what brought me from the East Coast to the West Coast. The Trident Submarine is 2 football fields long, and on it are 25 missiles. And on each one of those missiles are individually targeted warheads, from 14 to 17 of them on each one of the missiles. An individually targeted warhead means an atom bomb. 14 to 17 on each 20 of the 25 missiles. That's one Trident submarine. And the Navy planned to build 30 of them. You can't quite imagine that kind of violence, you know. And when I imagined that, it felt to me like the end of the world. And if ever used, it would be the end of the world as we know it. And the Navy never did build 30 of them. I think there are, 16 or 18 of them here. And now they're in the Pacific and the Atlantic Ocean. And they travel, of course, to the China Sea and all over. They're probably sitting very close to Taiwan right now. And so I just couldn't imagine that kind of violence. And I thought about the children and the flowers and the earth and what that would do if we ever use the Trident submarine. And even if we don't use it, how it was robbing the poor of funds, how much money we could spend on all kinds of wonderful things if we didn't have the Tridents. And so I knew of a community there on the West Coast. If anybody has read my book, they know that Jim Douglas played a very important part in my life in calling me into resistance. That's the title of the book too, All the Way In, to go all the way in. And so when I read his book, Resistance and Contemplation, I began to understand what liberation meant, to go all the way in, to be liberated, to be free, all the way into the truth, all the way into oneself in so many ways. And so he was the one who described the Trident Submarine. And so he was living with his wife, Shelley, and resisting on the West Coast at a place called Ground Zero Center for Nonviolent Action. Ground Zero is not the ground zero that this was before the ground zero in New York with the collapsing of the buildings. But ground zero really means the place where the explosion happens. If you saw the film Oppenheimer, or you kept seeing that photo, it's the very place where that explosion of a nuclear or atom bomb explodes is called ground zero. And nothing can live at ground zero. And so I traveled from the East Coast to the West to join that community when I knew about the Trident Submarine. And there, of course, I found a whole community of people who were saying no. Because the USS Ohio was the first one to come. I wanted to be there for the first one that would be deployed there in order to say no, not in my name. And so many people gathered around there. And when the first Trident submarine came in, we were out there in the water in rowboats saying no. We were tied together, and because we knew the Trident would come in on the water, above the water at that place. And so many things happened because of that resistance. We followed the Gandhian principles of nonviolence and the way Gandhi taught it. And we lived that truth. And so many actions began to happen. It was very difficult to organize on the water. And so when we needed to continue the resistance, because after the Ohio came, then came all the others. And so we decided instead to not go onto the water, but to resist when the train came in that was carrying the weapons to the Trident. And it was much easier to organize that because we organized along the whole route. It began in Texas and it traveled all throughout the country. And we alerted people that it was moving, and all kinds of people came out. And it was one of those times when I went on tracks when the first train came in. It was really the second train. The first one we didn't know about, so nobody was there. But then when we knew it would be coming, I decided that I would like to be one of the people to be in front of the train. And that story is in my book. Most people love this story. It's a favorite story of many people because it's a story, I think the attractive thing of it was that I took that little picture of a little baby, his name was Daniel, onto the tracks with me. I took my Bible, a picture of Daniel and daffodils. to say why I was going on the tracks. And when the officer pushed me to the ground and told me that I would be arrested if I went any further, Daniel's picture fell out of the Bible. And I didn't know I was going to say these words, but I said, his name is Daniel, and he's asking us to stop the train. And I just kept repeating that phrase as I was taken into the sheriff's car to be courted off to jail. And that was recorded in Seattle on TV. And unbeknownst to me, Glenn Milner, a young father, was in Seattle watching TV. And 2 years later, I was in the courtroom when he was in front of the train. And when the lawyer asked him why he was in front of the train, he said, because on one day in Seattle, he saw this woman and she was saying his name is Daniel and he's asking us to stop the train. And she was being arrested for the train, for being in front of the train. And so Glenn Milner knew that he, as a father, he said, it was like she spoke to me right through the TV. I had no sense that that had happened. It was beyond me, of course. But my words were taken through the TV to Glenn, and he became. And so this began happening at Ground Zero all the time. We would gather, and more people would become involved. And there were so many stories that I could tell about all the beautiful things that happened there. But the train was a very, very important symbol. And the piece of it that, and again, if you've read my book, you'll have this story in there. It's a story about an Austrian peasant in the time of Hitler. His name was Franz Jagerstätter. And he refused to go into Hitler's army. And so he was taken off to jail. He eventually was beheaded. And there's a book written about him. It's called In Solitary Witness, because he did it all alone. I was with a lot of community where I was when I went onto the tracks. He was all alone because he was advised by everyone not to do that because, you know, his responsibility was with his family and his children. But because when he was in jail, the chaplain asked him what prompted him to do this, and he said he had had a dream. And in the dream, he saw a white train and he boarded it. And then he heard these screams and people screaming and saying, he said in the dream to the person next to him, what is that screaming? And he said, don't you know where this train is going? This train is going to hell. And he got up and he had to get off the train. And when he woke, he knew that the train symbolized National Socialism in Germany at the time. And he had to say no, he had to get off that train. Well, I heard that story when I was living in Nashville, Tennessee, and I had traveled to Berea, Kentucky with another Dominican sister, Carol Feeney. I thought we were going there to listen to Daniel Berrigan's poetry. That's why we went. But that's not really what I heard. What I heard there was this story. This young woman, I still remember her. I still picture her. She was about 7 months pregnant, and she told that story. And I was touched at such a deep level. And I said to Carol on the way home, I know we're on that train. That train is a nuclear arms race. And we have to get off. But why would I get off if everybody's on it? The only reason I would get off is to get in front of it, to stop it.
Yeah.
That was about 2 years before I knew about the white train. Nobody knew about the white train. And so, as you can see, I was impelled to go there, to be in front of that train, because I had already said that's where I'd be. So all these wonderful things happened at the Ground Zero Center for Nonviolent Action. It was a very, very important time in my life. And always the theme of home kept coming in.
Jeanne, I'm gonna, so one theme that you talk about throughout your entire book that is so much what I hear you talking about right now is this idea about truth.
Yeah.
And what is truth? You know, there's what we hear in the media, there's messages that we hear as a culture, but your life has been about like going deeper, going all the way in to really explore what is truth. And I was wondering if you could talk to us about that. And just so everybody knows, you know, I'm going to ask Jeanne some more questions, and then we'll open it up for all of you to ask questions. But can you say something about this idea of truth and how, you know, how your idea or understanding of truth changed over your life?
Yeah, well, one of the reasons I believe that I joined the Dominican Order, because their motto was truth, veritas. And Dominic, he began the order in order to tell the truth, for his preachers to tell the truth. At that time, there was a heresy going around, the Albigensian heresy. And, and some people were preaching that matter was evil. The body was evil, you know. And some of us may know this kind of theology where that happens. And so he began his order for his preachers to preach the truth against the Albigensian heresy, that matter was not evil, it was good. And so that idea of truth captured me from the very beginning when I entered the Dominican Order. But I never understood that truth, following the truth, would lead me to resistance and to jail. But that's what happened along the way. In every step that I took, I began to see the truth. And in my book, it's there, you know. And the truth was told to me. I was a campus minister at Long Island University. And it was there that I first met young men who had been in prison. And they came to the university on a program, and you know, I would be with them and their parole officer. I worked with them and their parole officer. Many times they got back into jail or into the court, and I would go with them, and I would sit and hear their stories. And I had never met people like that before. The poor, that's mostly who's in the jails, the poor, and the brown people, Black people. And so I began to be changed. I began to see a different truth. My father was a New York City detective. So I, you know, had an understanding of the bad people as a child who were in jail. And so that was a way that I learned more of the truth, you know. In my book also, there's chapters on the Salvadoran people. I lived with them. these immigrants who people now are saying they want to get rid of, they, you know, they're a blight on the country, all of that. I began to live with them and to love them and to know their story and to see why they were here. And then I went to Salvador. And so the truth began to come to me, to open my eyes. Teilhard always says, you know, I was always attracted to, in his thought too, just learning how to see, to awaken and to see. And so all these experiences led me deeper and deeper into the truth. And then of course, learning about nuclear weapons and the Trident Submarine. And then I had that truth. And so what am I to do? Once I know that truth, I needed to act. So this journey into truth was calling me to leave. I had to leave many of the things I thought I knew were true. And the truth changed. Now I saw a different truth. My eyes were opened, usually through relationships with other people. Relationships with people that I didn't know while I was growing up. They were in my community.
And then you said eventually you left the house of your father.
Oh, yes. Well, eventually I knew that I had to say no to war, to weapons. And eventually, of course, I was arrested. And I remember the first time I was arrested when I went to the Pentagon and poured blood on the plaque that said Department of Defense. It used to be called the Department of War. They should bring that name back again, really, because it isn't really the Department of Defense. It's not really defending, it's creating war. And so we poured blood on that, and we said, this is the blood of the poor, this is the blood of El Salvador, this is the blood of Christ, on a Good Friday. And I was arrested. And when I was arrested, and then when I got into court, it first opened by saying the United States of America versus Jeanne Clark. And I thought, oh my goodness, the United States of America, all the states versus Jeanne Clark. And I knew at that point, what came to me was the story of Abraham and Sarah, when they were asked to leave their country, you know, just leave. And God would show them the way. They didn't know the way. And I thought, here, this is what I was being asked to leave. This understanding of my country being the greatest country on earth, which it really wasn't. It was producing all of this suffering and war. And so I thought in that way that I was leaving my father's house the way Abraham and Sarah had to leave whatever in their consciousness they were leaving. And so often, that's what life does to us. We have to leave something we think we knew and believed in order to go to a deeper truth, another truth. So that's how it went in my life.
So then,
and it's still happening. It's still happening. And then, of course,
yeah,
the greatest truth of all, to know that I am the universe conscious.
yeah. So tell us about your experience at Genesis Farm in 1992, when you had that awakening about your earth identity, your cosmic identity.
Yes, and that came through Sister Miriam McGillis, another Dominican sister, and who was teaching all about Thomas Berry. And that's when I first was introduced to Thomas Berry at Genesis Farm. And again, changed my whole, just as much as the Trident Submarine changed my life. Thomas Berry and his teaching changed my life. And it opened up for me another whole truth, a whole understanding, a whole new understanding. And if any of you know Thomas or will be getting to know Thomas in the courses at Deeptime, that's what I learned at Genesis Farm, all about Thomas Berry. And one of the things that stays with me all the time is he said, we're at a crossroads. We have two directions to go in. One is the Technozoic, where we think that technology will answer all the questions and lead us the way, or the Ecozoic, which is going in the direction where the human and the natural world become one in a mutual relationship. And so that's what I'm always working on, going into the Ecozoic, helping people to understand the Ecozoic and all of that. And the other thing I learned at Genesis Farm, of course, was about farming and food and the connection and how important it is to have organic food and not be using pesticides. And the whole understanding of bioregionalism, coming home to your place, your own place. And so coming to Genesis Farm really led me back to Long Island and my place here. At one point, I really wanted to go back to Ground Zero on the West Coast. And it was Miriam McGillis who said to me, but Long Island needs your voice. And she and many of my friends convinced me, and my religious congregation, who wanted me to stay on Long Island. And that's where I stayed. And that's when Homecoming Farm came into existence, because I came back from Genesis Farm knowing that I needed to start a farm. I needed to help people to stay connected to the earth. And so
that was going deeper into the world, honoring and reverencing matter, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. That's absolutely. And Elizabeth, who's here tonight too, who's the director of Homecoming Farm, she and I work very hard at helping people. And Thomas is at the very heart of our farm. Excuse me, my voice is kind of. I began the farm not only to grow organic vegetables, which are very important for the health on Long Island, but also to connect people to the earth, because I knew that the wisdom was there in the earth. And so that's what we do at Homecoming Farm. We connect people to the earth and to the story, teach them about Thomas who says there's no such thing as an object. Everything is a subject. And to be in communion with everything. And so we do a lot of different programs at the farm with children and teenagers and adults. And I think my book is also filled with stories about the children and what happens at the farm with the children.
You have this wonderful story you tell about when you take the children on the farm and give them a retreat experience. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, well, we understand that most times when the children come, they really don't know much about vegetables and growing, and so Elizabeth and I, we break the children up into groups, and she takes the children and shows them all the vegetables. Sometimes they don't even know, carrots grow under the ground. So this is what they're learning. they're learning about their food and their place, this place, and that we're growing everything without chemicals. And so Elizabeth is teaching them about how important the worms are and the bees, and telling them the stories about that. And then in my group, and they switch groups all the time, I take them because, and one thing I love to do with them, first we talk a little bit about it. I ask them, have they ever sat alone without a book or a radio or anything? Just sat outside, just alone. And most of them look at me like, no, they have no experience of that. And so I tell them that because inside of us, I said, is a friend, ourself. We need to begin to talk to ourselves, to get to know ourselves. And so we're going to go out I give them a little blanket. They go out onto the land, under the trees or in the sun, wherever they want to be. And I ask them to just listen. Listen to the trees and the birds. Feel the wind. And then talk to themselves. Ask themselves, how are they feeling? What are they thinking? It's a wonderful experience because the children now, and Thomas warned us about this, they don't understand that they have an interior life. Everything's coming to them from the outside, and there's no experience for them of an inner life, which is so, so important because it's there where the wisdom is. And so things like that help them, and to learn that everything is holy, everything is sacred, and there's all one community of life. The bees are a part of it, the worms are a part of we're all part of the same community of life. It's not just humans, it's a community of earth and all the creatures. And I think that this is one of the most important things to be doing, to be telling the children. I keep asking, who's going to teach the children the story? And who's going to teach them that they come from the stars, that they're stardust? Who's going to tell them the story, the cosmic story? So they can understand they have this whole large community. So there's a million kinds of stories that Elizabeth and I can tell about what happens on the farm with folks.
So Jeanne, then just in the last 4 years or few years, you took the Deeptime Leadership and Wellbeing Program offered on the Deeptime Network. And that's how I got to know you, was through that program. Mm-hmm. So I'm just wondering how you see that program inside the arc of your life.
Oh boy, that program certainly was a very deep experience for me. First of all, learning with a whole community, a global community, really. People from all over the world were there. And from every part of the United States. I mean, it was just, and to be learning together like that in relationship to a teacher, but to learn about leadership, not, a totally different understanding of leadership. It's not somebody at the top or the person with all the knowledge or, the person with the skills. It was all of us. We're all to learn that we're all leaders and that our leadership is connected to our gift. And then to trying to explore what is my gift? That happened to me in the program, to find out, what am I here to give uniquely as Jeanne, and then all the other people uniquely as themselves. What is the gift? Because that's why we're here, to give the gift back to each other in relationship. And it was all about relationship. And then I knew, of course, because I had learned about Thomas Berry like 30 years ago, and I knew his work and everything, I kind of knew the material. Intellectually, I knew it, and I was trying to live out of it. But what really deeply happened to me was I began to really live inside the universe.
Oh, beautiful.
To really know that I am the universe conscious. And the other thing that I always knew that there were no objects from Thomas. There were only subjects, but I began to really live that. And I would go down to the Great South Bay every day. The Great South Bay here in Long Island has become for me my counselor, my friend, my inspiration. It's me. I am the Great South Bay, and the Great South Bay is me. And that really happened. And then I really believe that that course was the seed for the book.
Mm.
That, and Carol Sargent, who's here tonight too, I think. Carol Sargent from Georgetown University, who recorded all my stories. We met for a couple of years, and I would just be telling the stories. I never intended to write a book. That book emerged out of the course and out of telling the stories. And in my book, I often talk about paradise. And I really believe that living inside the universe and knowing that we are the universe is living in paradise. The one thing about it is that the paradise includes suffering. See, we always excluded suffering when we think of paradise. We think of everything as perfect, no suffering, no grief. I don't believe that anymore. I think that paradise includes suffering. And when you live as the universe, with all its powers and all its wisdom, you can live in paradise, feeling it, experiencing it, little touches of it, not every day, of course, but because we get drawn back into our other life and the other context, this whole culture. But
Yeah.
especially needed today in this kind of crazy, insane world we're living in. If I didn't have this community, the Deeptime community, and if I weren't living in Deeptime, sometimes I joke about it and say, I think I'd be throwing myself off a bridge. But instead, at times I'm living in paradise. I'm living with peace and in the midst. It's also, I'm living with grief too at times.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Jeanne. Wow. You've given us so much here to ponder. And I would love to open this up to anybody who would like to ask a question. So basically, we'll go, for a Q&A until about 8:10, and then we'll say a few words about some programs that are coming up. But would anybody like to ask Jeanne a question or make a comment, about what she said? So much, sure. Oh, and let me just tell you to raise your hand. Okay, so to raise your hand in Zoom, you just go down to where it says reactions. You click on reactions and then click on raise hand. And then I'll call on you and you can unmute yourself. So let's see, I think it was Susan who raised her hand first. So I'm going to just jump to Susan, then we'll go to Lisa right after that. Go ahead, Susan.
Okay, thank you. Hi, Jeanne. So good to hear your story all the time. Every time I hear it, I love it. I'm new to this idea of new time, and I just wondered if deep time. I'm sorry, deep time. It's new to me. If you could talk just a little bit of what that means to you, Jeanne.
Yes, yeah, sure. Well, we always think, for example, we think of history and ancient history, usually in human terms. And so we go back, to the first humans, maybe, and then all of history of the human. But in deep time thinking, it's a whole different time. We go back 13.8 billion years to the very beginning of the universe. And then through all the time and all the experiences and all the creations, all that the universe did. That's the story of the universe. And that's deep time. So living in deep time is to live, at the very, even the light that first was present is still here. And so it's hard to explain it, but to know that you're living with the same understanding of the animals that came before you. When you look at your hand and you know that the star that exploded, the supernova, created all the elements that makes you. And I've learned that story. And so I live there. I live in that kind of time, not just, my own birth, that I know too, my own birthday as Jeanne, and I became an individual. But in deep time, I'm with all the creatures, and even before the earth had eyes or ears, to think of time like that. So living in the whole, I guess it's living in the whole, with wholeness, which would include the future too. And that's another whole understanding that I know there's a course that one of the members of Deeptime Network teaches, Sarmeet. He teaches a course on time, and I know that there's a whole different understanding also of time. Time, not that the way we think about it as past and future, but as right now, everything existing in this moment. That's how I try to live in this moment.
That's beautiful, Jeanne. Susan, there's also a lot more information on our website about deep time and what it is and principles of deep time. And you're always welcome to write to us, if you have any more questions about that specifically.
Thank you.
Thank you for that question. Lisa.
Hi, Jeanne. I've always so appreciated that you attend to the grief in all of this, in the paradise that you speak to that. I always appreciated that in the course that I was in with you. And I found myself wondering what made you go to Genesis Farm, or even hearing the arc of your life, and that you were with Trident and in Washington, and all the destruction you saw, all the, been in the jails, and then you found your way to the universe story and creation and organic farming, and it seems that you were able to transform a lot of the destruction into the creation. I wonder what your view of that is for yourself.
Yeah. Well, I think the grief part is very, very real. Because I think when everything you love is being destroyed, there's nowhere to go but to grieve. So I guess because I was taking it in and learning, I think curiosity is a big piece of it. I mean, my room is filled with books. I love to read, and I'm always looking, like even on Zoom now, for different understandings, different time. I'm always very curious, and that's another piece of the Dominican life: study and knowledge. And so I think that I was just open to learning new things, to being with new people in different situations. And I think the grief, because you can't do that, and that's why I think that many people are in denial, because they don't want to grieve, they don't want to allow the grief to come in. And it was Joanna Macy really who helped me with that a lot. I've known Joanna for, not that I know her so personally, but at Ground Zero, when I was on the West Coast, she was doing a lot of work on the nuclear issue at that time. That because as children of the nuclear age, we carry a lot of grief in our body. Joanna would help us to talk about that. So I've learned, I think that she really led me into facing that kind of grief and being transformed by grief, So I think it's curiosity, being open to new ideas. And I never felt so much fear, like even when I was in prison, or I didn't feel fear. I'm not sure why, but and I think it's just love. It's so much nicer to love than to hate. It's so much more, so, and all the mentors I had, oh my goodness. Thomas Merton, Teilhard, Dorothy Day. And then then I was into the mystics, Julian of Norwich, Hildegard, the mentors, and the people in my life, the mentors. And then, of course, Martin Luther King, tremendous influence on my life. Gandhi, all these ancestors. And then coming into Deeptime, learning that the ancestors are also not just humans. Going back to the ancestors and that, like the great South Bay, the great ancestor. She holds the memory of all of Long Island from its beginning. I think maybe it's the poet in me. That is my savior or my helper to transform ugliness and hatred into beauty.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a common theme. We certainly see it a lot. Yeah, thank you so much for articulating that, Jeanne. Yeah. Joyce. Hi, Joyce.
Voice.
I am just basking in hearing your voice and the beauty and wisdom in your storytelling. And I so have loved the book. And after hearing you again tonight and reminding me of things in it, I want to go back and reread parts because you reminded me. And it's such a wonderful, short book. I read it in a few days, but there's just so much wisdom in it. And at the beginning of this tonight, I wrote down, one of the things I love about your speaking of it and in the book is your kind of casual, from my perspective, but really certain courage in your choices. And also, as you speak of it, the clarity you have, which I just so much admire. And I wonder, in your allurements to each of these choices that seem so courageous to me, I mean, in your allurements and your leadings to these, did those come to you into your heart or into your mind or through your poetry or your writing? How did you birth the when you were being pulled to make these choices? What spoke to you?
Yeah, it's definitely in the heart, definitely. The thing, of course, I shared, the thing that led me to ground zero was Franz Jahrstetter. Knowing that story before I even knew that the train existed. So his courage, his witness spoke to me. And then hearing it, I knew I was on the train. And so his spirit, and I'm beginning to see, because even when I think about it, that I drove across the country from east to west without knowing anybody there. I didn't even know where I was going, in a sense. When I look back on that, I think, what in the world? How did I do that? But it was something calling me. This is why I know that I'm the universe conscious, because it's unexplainable in some ways, And I think this is true. This is not just my life. I think this is true of all of our lives. Something is drawing us. We're listening, So what drew me was that story of the train, and then the image of the Trident Submarine, this evil, evil thing drew me to do this, to say no, because it was the end of the world, and what am I going to do about it? So I think it was the things that were put before me, but I do believe that I do understand there's a world that we don't see, and there are energies that are moving us. And if we just make space and are open, they'll move us in different directions. So I don't know if that answers your question, Joyce, but your music, by the way, is another thing that I still have in my room, all your music. I shared that music with all the children. Your music moves me. Before I even got to know you, I knew your music. So I think it's all about its relationships. When I think of Carol Sargent at Georgetown, if I hadn't met her, there probably would be no book.
Mm.
You know, and it's just this meeting with people and our relationship, and one thing leads to another. So I believe it's based in relationship, and relationship with my deeper self, because it's always calling me to go deeper, to go all the way in, you know, the truth.
Yeah.
Truth calls us.
Thank you. Thank you. Oh, that's so
I
good.
think of the relationship, Jennifer. Thank you so much for birthing Deep Time and making this possible tonight. What a wonderful event to sponsor. Thank you. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Joyce. Thank you. Thank you. All right, let's see if we can get a few more questions in here. Bill.
Hello, Jeanne. I
Hi.
lived in Amityville, Long Island for 25 years.
Oh, really?
Yes, from the mid-70s to the turn of the century. And I went there to study classical yoga at Yoga Anand Ashram on Merrick Road.
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
not sure if you're familiar with that, but
I know about it, but I have never been there. Yeah.
yeah. So I'm in Florida now, and I'm very curious about where the farm is located on Long Island, because I intend to go back and to look you up there.
Well, we're in Amityville, right on Albany Avenue, in Amityville.
In Amityville on Albany Avenue.
Yeah, it's 555 Albany Avenue. It's the
Huh?
mother house. It's the mother house of the Dominican Sisters. The land is there.
Okay, fine, thank you. And I too have been very involved in urban agriculture here in St. Petersburg, in Florida.
Wonderful. Wonderful.
And
Great.
yeah, it's, so combining the you know, that relationship with the earth, with deep time study, with Matthew Fox and Brian Swimme and others who are contributing that wisdom to us, is just a marvelous combination. And I salute you in the work you've done and the courage you've had in this life. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, that Brian Swimme is another one of my heroes, another one of my mentors.
Yeah.
And I do see a hand up, Jennifer, of
Yes.
Jim DeRose, who is Daniel's father.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah,
Oh.
Daniel, the baby Daniel, you know, who was on the tracks with me. His
Hi,
father,
Jeanne.
Seattle. Hi, Jim.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
I had the great privilege to be in Wyoming with a group of my friends for my 70th birthday party, and then Daniel was there too, Jeanne. And so I've known Jeanne now for like 40 years.
Yeah.
And my son still visits when he's in New York. Matter of fact, he's going to see you probably in October or November for sure. But my question, and I just love talking to you. I miss kind of the morning coffee, sitting out on your porch and chatting, because we visit every year. But my question is, I've been reading a lot of Thomas Berry and Joanna Macy. And so I'm just curious, how do we begin a community here or anywhere, a group of people, because it's such a different concept, being raised a Catholic and other people that I know that are Catholic, and how different it is to kind of rethink Catholicism, rethink your own kind of ideas, what would be your suggestions about creating community?
Well, I find a lot of my community in what you're talking about in a whole new understanding on Zoom. I have a lot of a lot of people who I connect to, and certainly through the Deeptime, that's where I do connect with a lot of people. And I try to that's my answer for it, because if I just depended on the people who are around me, who I love, and some people in my congregation are coming to this understanding, but it's very, very slow. And I need more nourishment in understanding, in totally new ways through the story. And I find it on Zoom with people. And then I get connected to people in Australia, people in the Philippines, people globally and there are lots of people who have this consciousness now. I've learned that through Deeptime, and I've met them through Deeptime. And I have developed such deep relationships with people who I have never met in person. I think Marianne Rowe is here tonight. She's one of the people, or Joyce, and many of the people here, Bob Harrington, who's here with us. And I think this is a whole new way. And that's why technology is, when we talk about the technozoic, it's not a denial of technology. The technology is helping us to become a global community. So that's one way. And then at home, what I try to do is be with the people who for me, it's Elizabeth, who's with me at the farm. And there's a group, I call them elderberries. They're elders who have been with Thomas Berry. I'm with Carol Sargent, usually on Zoom. And so I think you find along the way, I don't know if that's any answer to your question, Jim, but.
Oh, no, that's very good. I can almost I'd love to give you a hug right now because you just seem so close.
Cyber hug. Yeah. Now I see that Steve Martin has come into the meeting, and he's the director of the Deeptime Leadership and Wellbeing Program. And I'm going to let him talk in a minute, but can we get, let's see, if we could get those two more questions in quickly, that would be great. Myrene, do you think you can do that quickly? Do a quick question?
I can. I think I can very quickly. I haven't formulated any questions because I'm certainly very new to the group, and I'm going to be starting the Deeptime program in September. I'm in awe. I'm in absolute awe. And as I listened, I could relate to so many of the things that you were saying, certainly not to the depth that you expressed them, but somewhat. I describe myself as looking for wholeness, and I think that I have been learning and yearning for a long time. And I'm really humbled and really open to what I expect is going to be a wonderful world of connection with Deeptime. It came to me out of the blue, like so many things do, and I didn't expect it, but Brian Schwimme's work and Thomas Berry have really changed my life, and I'm not even really immersed in it yet. So thank you all, and thank you so very, very much.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much for that, Myrene, and look forward to seeing you in the program. Annette, can you do a quick comment or question? And then I think this will be the last one, Annette, and then we'll go to Steve. Make sure you unmute yourself, Annette.
I was impressed by everything, but I really perked up when you talked about children. I work with children ages 0 to 5, and opening up their inner lives to them really struck me as being, I want to know more about that. And
Yeah.
that's kind of where I'm at. If you have any suggestions at all, I would love to explore them.
Jeanne, do you want to answer that? I mean, there's also a program in, it's not coming to me right now, but if you write to me, I will get the name of it, that specifically focuses on the inner life of the child. And these people are very immersed in the work of Thomas Berry and Brian Swimme. I think we have some Montessorians here in the room. If you're a Montessorian, can you raise your hand? I just want to know. I think there were some, but I'm not sure about that. Oh, Kathleen Vermeulen. Yes. Okay. And I've done a lot of work with Montessori teachers, and it's a very, very important theme in Montessori, and that is the spiritual life of the child. That has to do with not so much the conveying of information, but the activating of the inner life of the child. So there's lots and lots of information on this in many different directions. And you can write to me, and we can give you some ideas for sure. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I often think that we are born mystics, because I see a lot of mysticism in children. A lot, because they're so close to the earth. I think we're born mystics, and we're just educated out of it.
Yeah.
And we need education to know that we're teaching mystics, and to keep going deeper and deeper into that life of theirs. That's how I think about children.
That's great. I will keep that in mind when I'm working with my kids, that they're mystics. Okay. Yeah, that's great. Thanks.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Annette. Steve, are you here? I know you are.
I'm here. Hi, Jennifer. Hi, Jeanne. So great to be with you both tonight. Oh, good. It's good to see you, Jeanne.
Thank
you.
Good to see so many other people too.
Steve is the director of the Deeptime Leadership and Wellbeing Program, and we do have a program starting on September 20th, so we just can't help sharing the good news about it. Steve, take it away.
It's really exciting, and I would say that Jeanne's book is a book about Deeptime leadership, because it really exemplifies taking a larger perspective, acting from a place of deep trust, being in a place of sensitivity and relationality, and following great courage and unpacking your gift in community. And that's really what leadership is in this new paradigm. And so I'll put the link to the program in the chat. We have some information sessions coming up soon. And I'll just show you the page here briefly, because the image here exemplifies the program. There's lots of information on the page here, but we take a group of individuals, or what we think are individuals, like stars. We put them together in a community in a larger universe context, and all of a sudden the community begins to develop and unfold, and the stars activate, being in a relationship with each other, and they create something new. And that's this transformational process that's guided by the universe that we call Deeptime Leadership. We also call it Deeptime Leadership and Wellbeing, because well-being is about being in touch with and being guided by the whole. And so that's part of our program's orientation, is how can we come into a greater sense of wholeness for ourselves, for our communities, and for the Earth community, because we can't be whole as individuals if we're only living for ourselves. We need to be there for the entire wholeness of what's present in the Earth community and each other. So it's leadership that starts with evolving universe and guides individuals in community in unpacking their gifts, which Jeanne wonderfully referred to. What's our allurement? Can we be places where we can evoke each other's allurement and bring it out to the world, as Jeanne did with her gift, in sometimes very unexpected ways? So it's a wonderful program. We have a global community. We had over 100 people from 12 countries in our program last year, a similar number from the year before that. And there's lots of information on the website about it, but it's really a wonderful experience. I hope you come to some of the information sessions coming up soon. We'll send you a follow-up email about that, but we'd love you to consider it and contemplate joining us. And Myrene, so glad you're going to be with us in September. Looking forward to getting to know you as well.
And
Thank you, Jennifer.
Steve, you want to say a word about contemplating the sun, which is coming up?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So by training, I'm an astronomer, and I studied with Brian Swimme and know Thomas Berry's work very well. And so I'm offering an event that's free through the Deeptime Network on September 9th. I'll just put the link in the chat here, about being with the sun in a contemplative way. So I will be offering this with my colleague and friend, Marianne Rowe, who is also here with us. And we're taking Thomas Berry's perspective that we live in a world of subjectivity. So what happens when we activate our subjectivity in the field of subjectivity of the sun? Right? We live every day through the grace of the sun, inside the grace of the sun. And so we're offering this experience for people around the world to come together under the same shining sun and just contemplate what's it like to be in the presence of the sun. These are wonderful events that Marianne and I have been doing for a while. And it's an opportunity to have a taste of the experience of deep time. Right? What does it feel like to live in deep time? And so that's our intention for this offering. And we've had wonderful experiences with other people before. And we just hope it's a sunny day where you are. And if it isn't, there'll still be sunlight. So feel free to join us, rain or shine. So thank you, Jennifer.
Yeah, and that's a free event. So just join in if you like. Oh boy, what a rich evening. This has absolutely been wonderful. I think we just have a couple of minutes if anybody wants to say something, and then we'll have a closing poem with Jeanne. But was there anybody else who there was somebody who I cut off because I wasn't. Oh, it was you, Barbara. Barbara, did you want to say what you wanted to say?
Am I on now?
Yes,
Yeah.
you are. Yep.
Oh, okay. I just wanted to say thanks a million for all of this and for Jeanne. And I am particularly interested in what wisdom Jeanne might want to share about living in these liminal spaces with deep time consciousness and being surrounded in a culture that would just love to shut that down.
Yeah.
What's that like? And what does the Great South Bay have to contribute to that?
Everything. Everything. Every day I have to go there. I think that's the key. We have to, instead of watching all that news on TV, we need to go outside and be with the trees or the rivers or I'm with the great, I live in suburbia, so I have to, I drive to the Great South Bay, just about 15 minutes. But I usually go there every day, and it's a whole different world because I'm relating in a different way to that bay. The bay Because I've been given the gift of understanding the cosmic story and deep time. I really believe it's a gift that's been given to me by other people. Brian Swimme, Miriam McGillis, Thomas Berry, Teilhard. I am so grateful to them. And so I think that's the thing, to get out of the house, get out of the place, and go to the land, to the soil, to wherever it is that you can go, and be there relating as a subject to other subjects. Because that TV is all about objects and using people, and it's a whole different consciousness. That's an illusion. It's an illusion, really. So go. I now at Homecoming Farm. We know that it's probably our last season as Homecoming Farm, and we're being transitioned into something new. The land is saved, but I go out there and I want to say, what is the land saying to us? What kind of a relationship do we have with it? You know.
So Jeanne, on that note, you have a wonderful poem on that subject to close us out today. Can you read that for us?
Okay. I sat beside the Great South Bay, reading chapter 5 in Brian Swimme's book, The Hidden Heart of the Cosmos. The sun was beaming down, the water receiving its loving caress. And this poem came to me. Tears come when I become aware. Amazing truth breaks in, reminding me again of my connection to all others in a stream of energy, not earned or bought. Each day enough, no running out. This giant star gives of itself and energizes me. Abundance given equally to all. A sacrifice is asked. Like her, to give away a part of me in creative acts of love. Communion. The seagulls flying just above the water, their wings propelled by energy we share. They soar and play, they hunt for food, existing by the very energy allowing them to fly. I breathe the air and say a prayer of gratitude. Communion. The world around me goes about its daily tasks, to work, to buy, to sell. I yearn that all might know the simple truth, so clear, yet veiled and needing time and space to see and understand. A world of energy and love is dawning, a great turning taking place. The seagulls in the water, the fish unseen below, all tell the story. The sun graces all of us with energy. Even in the darkness and the grief, the sacredness of life exists and energy abounds.
Thank you, Jeanne. Thank you, thank you. Thank you, everyone, for coming.
Thank you, Jennifer, for calling us together.
Yes. And Have a good night. Have a good day, wherever you are. Blessed be.
Blessed be.
Mhm.
Thank you, Jeanne.
Thank you, Jeanne.
Good night.
Good night.